Welcome back. All right, a redraft for all you fine people on the internet. I tried to make sure the logos are accurate to the era that I'm going with here, which is 1994. 1994 is not a star-studded draft, but it's an interesting one because there are a lot of good goaltenders in this draft. So I thought, all right, I want to do a redraft of this one. And again, you guys feel free to let me know your thoughts. When I do these redrafts, it's not meant like I am saying ironclad, this player is better than this player. Rah, I hate those players. That's not what I'm doing. It's just basically me saying, yeah, if I was a GM, I would take this player. So if I like Matt Boldy, I like Matt Boldy. Anyways, 31 goals in all this past season. But, yep, all right. So, and again, like I said with the 2019, it is too early, but it's still fun. As long as you don't read the comment section. All right, number one on this draft. And this draft was an interesting one in that the guy who would go number one, in my opinion, in a redraft, Daniel Alfredsson. Daniel Alfredsson was a star player for the Ottawa Senators and an absolute steal in this draft. He was not drafted in the first round, and of course, he was the face of the Ottawa Senators for a large portion of his career. I think he would be the guy to go first in this draft, which is tough because number two on this draft and going to Anaheim, and so Devils fans will definitely thumbs this down. It's Patrick Elias. Yeah. So Elias, one of the best players of his generation, definitely one of the best Devils to ever put on a jersey. I think he would go number two to the Anaheim Ducks. So he was a steal in this draft as well, which is saying something because the number one draft pick in this draft was Ed Jovanovski, who went on to have a very good career, but drops in this draft. He played in the Olympics. He was a great player for the Canucks for a long time, played very well in Arizona as well. But yeah, Alfredsson and Elias. Now, Patrick Elias, of course, there's talk about, him being overlooked for the Hall of Fame. I think he eventually gets there. It's just a matter of when. All right, so at number three, going to the Ottawa Senators. So what's interesting is Ryan Smith was drafted early in this one by the Edmonton Oilers. And I'm wearing Oilers because they had the number 4 and the number 6 picks in this draft. They used one on Smith and the other one on Jason Bonsignor. And Bonsignor, of course, his career was not very long. And so, the Oilers had a hit on one and a miss on the other. But, yeah, and Bonsignor, spoiler alert, will not be in the top 26. But with Ryan Smith, he is, of course, the face of the Edmonton Oilers. So what's interesting is you've got the first three guys in this draft who are not necessarily mega superstar Hart Trophy winners, but all three of them went on to be kind of the identity of the teams that they played for. And, of course, Smith, the captain. Alfredsson was captain. I believe Elias was captain. So there's definitely some synergy between these three. You guys can let me know if you think I got them in the right order. At number 4, to the Edmonton Oilers. So I was talking about draft picks that were steals. How about Evgeny Nabokov for the San Jose Sharks? So he ends up moving up to 4th in my redraft. Nabokov was very, very good at his peak. One of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League, and he could play a ton. San Jose, of course, had a lot of goaltenders during this era, and it starts with Nabokov, 1994 draft pick. The San Jose Sharks definitely had some solid scouting when it came to their goaltending. Toskala was pretty good. I know how things ended with Toskala. He was pretty good. Kiprasov, of course, and Nabokov. Yeah, they had some pretty good goaltenders in San Jose. So drafting at 5th, the Hartford Whalers. Milan Hajduk. One thing about Hajduk, I wish he had come over and played in the NHL sooner. He was a player that I wasn't aware of until I saw him playing international hockey, and I was like, wow, this guy is really talented, very good player. When's he coming over? And, of course, he came over, played for the Avs, put up a ton of goals, absolutely fantastic career. And, again, I just wish he'd been in the NHL sooner so we could have seen him score even more goals than what he did. And just imagine if the Whalers had picked him. I don't know that anything could have kept the Whalers in Hartford anyways, but I mean, better drafting, better trading, better overall results. Couldn't have hurt, right? So, number 5 to the Whalers ends up being Hajduk. And again, another steal in that draft. At number 6, so the Oilers, I have drafting 2 goaltenders. And this is what proves I do not care who's drafting where when I do a redraft. because I'm just going by which players I think are the best from that draft. And Tim Thomas, who was drafted originally by the Nordiques, drafted late. It took forever for him to get a chance with the Boston Bruins. And I never understood why Boston didn't just give him the reins sooner than they did. Basically, it had to be injuries, and they had to be forced to make him the starter. But Thomas ends up with a really solid career as a member of the Boston Bruins, of course. If Nabokov and Thomas have been drafted by the Oilers, they probably don't need Curtis Joseph sooner than he was out of the Oilers organization. So interesting that 2 goaltenders end up going in the top 6. At number 7, and this is where things are interesting, because the LA Kings drafting Ed Jovanovski. And again, I have a Jovanovski jersey, Arizona, but I like Jovanovski quite a bit. I thought he was great. I thought he was one of the Canucks' best defensemen they had ever had. I would put Jovanovski in there with Quinn Hughes. I think is going to be the best defenseman the Canucks have ever had. But Oland was very good. We'll talk about him in a little bit here. Edler had some really strong years. Lidster was one of my favorites during the 80s, but Jovanovski ends up being an excellent defenseman. I look at the run in 2011 by Thomas and his numbers, and I think, it's hard to argue against Tim Thomas at 6th, but if you want to argue Jovanovski was better for longer, then absolutely you can, because that was the argument I was having with myself before putting this video into motion. Number 8 to Tampa Bay. It's another goaltender. And another goaltender who was drafted late. And it took a while for Thomas Vokoun to hit at the NHL level, take over as a starter, and prove himself. But Vokoun ends up having a really solid career too. And so, yeah, this draft had some very good goaltenders. Nabokov, Thomas, Vokoun. That's not too shabby. And again, that's part of the reason why when I was looking through drafts and saying which one would be interesting, this one was the one that stood out to me. Or one of the ones that stood out to me. So at number 9, the New York Islanders. I don't know if this is going to be considered sacrilege or not. But Chris Drury. Chris Drury, of course, now a general manager in the National Hockey League, but he had a very good career when he was playing. If the Islanders drafted him in 9th, would have been a decent pick. There were some misses in the 1994 draft. That's the thing that's interesting to me, is there were some misses, but there were some really good steals had later, and Drury ends up having a pretty good career for himself, and so he ends up in the first column of this draft, which only goes 9 picks because there's only 26 in the first round. Fewer teams and all that, and of course a few teams that have moved since this draft took place. At number 10, going to the Washington Capitals. Another late draft pick that moves up quite a bit in this draft, Thomas Holmstrom, who was a huge part of the Detroit Red Wings late 90s, early 2000s, right through until the 09 Cup, or 08 Cup, right? So Holmstrom, really, really good third liner. Better hands than I think he gets credit for, just parks himself in front of the net, agitator, drove other teams crazy, and so he ends up going to the Capitals. I apologize to Red Wings fans, but there isn't an alternate universe in which Holmstrom belongs to somebody other than Detroit, so there's that. And I believe I've already done a career video on Holmstrom. I think I've done a career video on most of the guys who've gone up on the board so far. Which brings us to number 11. And the aforementioned Matthias Oland. Oland had some very good years for the Vancouver Canucks. Probably overplayed a little bit at points. And by the time he left Vancouver, it looked like his career was, winding down, and he wasn't quite as effective. And I don't know if the Canucks overplaying him sped up that process or not. But yeah, Oland wore the Canucks jersey for years with pride, moved on, played in Tampa Bay, played a leadership role there. And by all accounts, I've never heard anything negative said about Oland. And I talk often about how, I think about players in terms of, so if I yell at the screen think about something they did. And while I had those moments with Edler, I had those moments with other Canucks defensemen like Garth Butcher. There were times, Lidster, there were times too, but Oland, I can't really remember any. But anyways, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just I can't off the top of my head remember any. Oland was a very good two-way defenseman and probably got overlooked at least a little bit because, he's very good. Was he one of the absolute best? Probably not, but definitely deserves some credit here. And so he goes at 11. Going at 12 in this draft, going back to goaltenders. So the Quebec Nordiques, drafting 12th overall, draft Jose Theodore. Now, of course, they're bound for the Colorado location years down the road, but Jose Theodore had a really good career. Of course, he had that one fantastic year for Montreal. And Jose Theodore was one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League at his peak. He wasn't there that long. The one thing I'll say for Theodore, though, is he took way more criticism, I thought, than what he should have. I thought he was still a pretty good middle-of-the-road goaltender through most of the rest of his career. It's just he set the bar so high with that 1 year that he wasn't going to reach it again, especially since it wasn't that long since Patrick Roy. Of course, not long after that, you get Carey Price. But Theodore, I think, is underrated at this stage. So number 13, going to Vancouver, it's another goaltender. What did I say? This is a draft of goaltenders. I don't know how I feel about this one. So I talked about Marty Turco recently in a video where I was talking about goaltenders who had great first round that they got knocked out in. Marty Turco, another goaltender I felt like from that generation was underrated. He was excellent for Dallas. Yes, Dallas failed in playoffs regularly. No, I don't blame Turco for it. I know there's Stars fans that did. I know there were other fans that did. I didn't. I didn't look at the Stars failures and say, if they didn't have Turco, I don't know if they would have been in the playoffs. Turco is a pick for the Canucks. It's a choice. It's an interesting choice. And you guys can let me know your thoughts on that. But yeah, Turco, really, really good career for him. I thought anyways, I think I've done a career video on Turco. If I haven't, I need to. But at any rate, yeah, Marty Turco, another goaltender. So for goaltenders, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 5 out of 13 picks are goaltenders in this draft. So you guys can decide whether that means it's a weak draft or if there's just a lot of really good goaltenders. Number 14 on this draft is a player who played quite a bit. Actually, it's interesting where this one ends up because Steve Sullivan played for Chicago. In fact, he resurrected his career in Chicago. He had to prove himself over and over and over because he was a small player. So if you're a small player in the National Hockey League, GMs aren't all that enamored with you. They're not all that interested in keeping you around. And with Sullivan, he bounced around way too much. And of course, Don Cherry famously raged about Sullivan he was waived by Toronto and ended up in Chicago, right? Or was it New Jersey first? At any rate, the Leafs waive Sullivan. Sullivan goes on and has some really good games after that, scores some nice goals. And so on Coach's Corner, we got to hear about Steve Sullivan every week. And honestly, I thought that was pretty funny. I just thought it was really funny because, yes, I thought when he was waived, I'm like, why are they waiving him? He's a really good player. And in general, it was because of his size it felt like it was the size that teams were passing on him for. So at number 15, it's just weird when a player's already proven they can play in the NHL and you're still like, yeah, but he's small, so we're going to waive him. Number 15, player that you may have heard of. I could just write O-Dog, couldn't I? Jeff O'Neill. Jeff O'Neill had a good career. Obviously, there were issues that ended up shortening it. But in his prime and at his peak, O'Neill was a very good top six forward and could do a little bit of everything out there. And it's a shame his career wasn't longer. I don't always agree with his opinion when it comes to him, with the announcing and all of the TSN stuff. But you know what? I have nothing but respect for his career. And there are many times I agree with him as well. So Jeff O'Neill ends up a little bit past the middle in the first round in this one. Believe he was drafted earlier in the original draft, wasn't he? Was the Hartford draft pick, right, at 5. So he ends up dropping, but again, there's so many good goaltenders dropping in this draft. There's no shame in that. Number 16. So who do the Toronto Maple Leafs end up drafting? They draft a defenseman who had a booming shot. Sheldon Surrey. Sheldon Surrey, nice long career, interesting career. I don't think I've done a video on Sheldon Surrey. That's another one that I might need to remedy because it was an interesting career for Surrey. And again, he had that booming shot from the point. Sometimes defensively there were some issues there, but overall, respectable career. And I think at 16, I think that's the right spot for him. Once you get to this point in this draft, it really is just who do you think ends up going here? And so I went back and forth on a few of these guys. But Surrey, I settled on 16 for him. At 17 is right here. And there's going to be people who want him to have been taken sooner. originally taken by Ottawa early in this draft, and that's Radek Bonk. Radek Bonk was a very good top six forward in his prime. Bonk was a very good goal scorer, and am I underrating him by having him at 17? There will be those who say that I am. Again, I probably could have argued him up to 14th, but you guys can let me know your thoughts. Number 18 on this list, going back to a defenseman here. I believe we're done with goaltenders. No, we're not. Nope, there's one I just realized is still yet to come. And Oleg Tverdovsky. Tverdovsky was a highly thought of prospect when he was drafted. He did have some good years. Not a lot of good years, though, and he ends up being out of the NHL, ends up playing overseas. And so overall, I would put Tverdovsky at 18th on this board. Tverdovsky, I can see people saying he could be higher, maybe arguing him ahead of Surrey. You may argue him beneath a couple of guys in this side too. But with the drafts this old, and once you've got the entire career, it can be tough to rank players. But it's fun, isn't it? I find it fun. Stay out of the comments. Okay, yeah, no, I'll try. Number 19. Another one I kind of went back and forth on, so I'm going to talk about this one too. Good draft, though. Jeff Friesen. Jeff Friesen was one of my favorite players in the National Hockey League when he came up. And he had a lot of potential. Never quite reached the peak that was expected of him when he came into the NHL. At least I didn't think he did. And then kind of petered out. So Jeff Friesen goes on to have a pretty good career. That's one that I know I had thought about doing a career on at some point. And then I looked through his career and I was like, there's not really that much there for me to report on. But yeah, for Jeff Friesen, another player who played a lot of years in the National Hockey League, scored a bunch of points, and I do expect there to be some debate about where some of these guys ended up. Number 20 on the board. I'm going to write his proper name, but nobody called him Frederick that I can remember. And that's Freddie Modin. Modin, of course, famously played for the Leafs, played for Tampa Bay as well. Modin was one too. Very good goal scorer at his peak. Solid top six option on the wing. And Modin's career kind of petered out at one point. But again, everybody's does. And I thought Modin belonged at 20. So again, once you get past 15, that can be kind of tough. Number 21 on the board. For Boston now, Boston drafts Richard Zednik. So Richard Zednik ends up going 21st to the Boston Bruins. Sorry, I had to answer a call from Bear. Richard Zednik, Boston Bruins. Zednik had a good career. 30 goal scorer during his career. Sure. Nice long career. Absolutely. And so Zednik ends up at 21st on the board. So we get to 22nd. Quebec's up again. So Quebec at 12th drafts Jose Theodore. At 22nd, I have them drafting. Good third line player mostly through his career. Also played on the fourth line. One I actually liked using in the EA Sports NHL games, and that's Ethan Morrow. Yeah, for whatever reason in the EA games, Morrow was pretty good, pretty fast, good shot. And in reality, Morrow was a good defensive forward, as I remember it, towards the end of his career as well. Played a lot, and so Morrow ends up at 22nd on the board. I do believe he was a Chicago draft pick, right? This is where people say, well, why didn't you rate him on the board? It's fine. It's fine. Sometimes I rate on the board who they took originally. Sometimes I don't. What's life without whimsy? Number 23. Detroit drafts. So this is interesting. This is where people are saying, okay, now there's no way. There's no way that's by accident. Absolutely it is. Dan Cloutier, 23rd to Detroit. So Cloutier gets remembered for questionable playoff performances with the Vancouver Canucks. I have defended Cloutier for years. Now, I've defended Cloutier in that he was a very good goaltender at his peak. The problem was he played through injuries, probably played when he shouldn't have, and his confidence could be shaky. But Cloutier could be very, very good. There were games with him in Vancouver where right out of the gate you'd say, oh, he is dialed in. He is great. Glove hands there, the blocker, everything's working tonight. And then there were other nights where you could tell right out of the gate that it's not there. His confidence isn't there. And you knew he probably wasn't going to finish the night as the Canucks goaltender, at least on the ice. Not that they would trade him in game or anything, But yeah, Cloutier, I still think in this redraft belongs in the first round. There were other goaltenders that I could have put in here, other defensemen and forwards as well. So you guys can look through the list and let me know what you think. But I still think Cloutier going to Detroit. And the reason it's kind of funny is because famously, Cloutier allows the goal from center ice by Nick Lidstrom against Detroit with Vancouver. So there's that. So it's just interesting how that worked out. Number 24, another player who had some excellent years. Just didn't have enough of them for me to put him higher up. And that's Sergei Berezin. Played, of course, with Toronto. A very good goal scorer in his prime. And I believe there was foot speed issues for him towards the end of his career as well. But yeah, he was a goal scorer. That was his job. Just not in that top role for that long for me to have him higher than 24th. But I still think he belongs in the first round of this draft. And again, that's by the Pittsburgh Penguins, who were using the Robo Penguin at that stage in time. Number 25 on the board. Famously, I believe he was drafted last that year by the New York Rangers, Kim Johnson. Kim Johnson ended up being a pretty good last draft pick. And that was years before Patrick Hornquist did that with Nashville. But Kim Johnson, good defenseman, ends up going to New Jersey at 25th. That is the first and the only draft pick for New Jersey. So you get Kim Johnson on the blue line. I think New Jersey fans will be like, yeah, can we just have Elias back? This video is just silly. We don't want Kim Johnson. We want Elias. But yeah, 25th goes to Johnson. And then 26th, and I went back and forth on who to have as the last one on this board. But I'm going with Bryce Salvador. Longtime defenseman with New Jersey, played in St. Louis. And he's now a rinkside announcer / color commentator in the NHL. And so I have Bryce Salvador, a defensive defenseman who could clear the front of the net, going 26th overall to the New York Rangers. So there you go, the 1994 entry draft. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Again, these videos aren't meant to be taken like super duper seriously, though there are some in the comments that seem to. But let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.